Hello, and welcome back for episode 5 of the Life and Mission of St. Mary Euphrasia. I'm really excited about today because at this point in our story, we really get to see the global expansion of the mission. But getting there was not an easy process, as we'll see. In our last episode, we saw Mary Euphrasia's entrance into Our Lady of Charity, her giftedness in working with the girls, her early leadership, and the creation of the Magdalens, now known as the Contemplatives of the Good Shepherd. We asked you to consider what attracted you to Good Shepherd, the gifts that you bring, and the connection to your personal calling. Courtney, I wondered if you would share with us what it was that attracted you to Good Shepherd.
Of course. I was really looking for a job where I could work with children in need and really feel like I was making an impact and a difference in the world, and I was able to find that with the Good Shepherd.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing that with us. Friends at home, I hope that you were able to reflect on the path that brought you to Good Shepherd as well, and what about the mission connects with your life and story.
So you said the expansion of the work throughout the world was not a quick and easy process. So how did it all start?
Well, Mary Euphrasia was a very well-loved leader in her community in Tours, and she began to develop an outstanding reputation among church leaders and city officials. 4 years into her term as superior of Tours, she received a request from the Bishop of Angers to establish a community in his city. At the same time, there was a man in Angers who came from a wealthy family named Count Augustin de Neuville, and his mother's dying wish was for there to be a house open to care for women and girls in the city, and she left him a large amount of money to see that it happened. When Mary Euphrasia went to Angers to visit, she met de Neuville and several others. In addition, there was a house all picked out for the new work. It was an old cotton factory called Tournamine. It was old and crumbling, but it would do for the time. Mary Euphrasia agreed to found a new house called the Good Shepherd there in Angers. After staying for a couple weeks to get things started, Mary Euphrasia went back to Tours and left Sister Mary Paul Bowden in charge. Well, unfortunately, things did not go smoothly. Sister Mary Paul was a very fearful person, and it doesn't seem that she knew exactly what to do. The new community in Angers had very little food, money, or items for the house. When Count de Neuville gave them some money, Sister Mary Paul buried it rather than use it. No one in town knew how bad things were for the sisters. The community begged Mary Euphrasia to come back. Sister Mary Paul said that there was no way that they could succeed, and she also wanted to go back to Tours.
That doesn't sound like an easy start. So if Mary Euphrasia was in charge at Tours, how did she end up coming back to Angers?
Well, at the end of Mary Euphrasia's term as superior in Tours, it was decided that she and Sister Mary Paul would just switch places. It was a harder decision for Mary Euphrasia than we might think, and she almost backed out. On her way to Angers, she stopped to stay at the Ursuline convent, where her old friend Pauline de Lignac was superior. Mary Euphrasia had a terribly emotional night and had decided to turn back and to stay in Tours. But very early in the morning, she got a visit from Monsieur Pasquier, who was a priest in town. And he told her that he had had a vision that night, and that she was not to give in to her fears, but that she must continue on to Angers, that it was God's will. And so she went.
So what happened when she got there?
Well, things immediately got better with Mary Euphrasia in charge. She set to the work of uncovering the buried money, getting the necessities for the sisters, and repairing the damaged relationships with the donors and officials in Angers. She spent some time getting to know the girls that were in their care too, as she still loved being with the young people. The first time she visited one of the classes, though, all of the girls jumped out the windows. Well, unfortunately for the girls, though, it was raining outside, so it wasn't long before they came back in. Mary Euphrasia calmly looked up from her desk and said, "Oh, are you back already?"
That's hilarious. I don't know that I would have been that calm about it. That does remind me of her quote, though, when she said, "You often ask me what tactics I use to manage the girls." Well, it was with justice and kindness.
Exactly. As we talked about in our earlier episode, she remembered how hard it was to be a young girl living away from her family and not feeling supported. Her philosophy of care definitely reflected this. She also said, "Take care not to scold too much. Be serious but full of kindness, especially to new arrivals, because no matter the color of their tears, they are always bitter. And if you are not good and compassionate to them, they could succumb to despair." Well, back to our story, though. During this time, Count de Neuville and Countess Genevieve d'Andigné became very important friends and financial donors. Madame d'Andigné became Mary Euphrasia's traveling companion and close friend. She donated money for a lot of different things, including the chapel where Mary Euphrasia was eventually buried and a grove of lime trees. Count de Neuville became a close friend as well. He often stopped by to visit, wrote letters to Mary Euphrasia and many other sisters, and by the end of his life, he had spent most of his family fortune on the Good Shepherd. Mary Euphrasia even called him the founder of Good Shepherd.
It really seemed like Mary Euphrasia was able to get a lot done, in part because of their relationships with other people in the city.
That's a really good point. Under Mary Euphrasia's leadership, new sisters began entering the novitiate. In the beginning stages of Angers, Count de Neuville wanted to pay for a chapel that the sisters, girls, and community would use. In drawing up the plans, Mary Euphrasia wanted to have 40 stalls for the sisters. Count de Neuville was taken aback with the small number and told him that the Good Shepherd was going to be so big that she could put in 200 stalls and it wouldn't be enough. And he turned out to be right. With Mary Euphrasia in charge, new sisters came pouring in. So also in the first couple years, requests started coming in for new foundations in different cities in France, like Le Mans and Poitiers. There were plenty of new young sisters in Angers, but not very many well-formed, wise, older ones. At one point, there was a need for an older, wiser sister to be the directress of girls, but there wasn't anyone in Angers. Mary Euphrasia requested that her original house in Tours help, but her request was denied. A request was then sent to the house in Nancy, and that was also denied. Each house was independent and self-sufficient, and they didn't share resources or sisters. So that gave Mary Euphrasia, as well as some other sisters and Count de Neuville, an idea. What if there could be a centralized house that could train new sisters and distribute money and resources to all the houses? That would ensure the success of all of the houses and not just one, and it would be called the Generalate.
Her sisters and everyone must have been so excited. That sounds like a much more efficient way to expand the mission.
It was more efficient, but not everyone was supportive. Because there would need to be a new article in their constitution, the move would split Angers from Our Lady of Charity. Not an easy decision. But as Mary Euphrasia often said, all for the mission. Well, the Bishop of Angers, Bishop Montault, liked the idea. He had always been a big supporter of Good Shepherd, but the bishop in Tours opposed her, and he thought that he was still in charge of Angers because the house was founded from there. Sister St. Paul, remember her, also opposed the idea and said that it was not in keeping with the spirit of St. John Eudes. Many people accused her of being selfish and prideful, and when she was told that she should defend herself, she just replied, "I would rather be the accused than the accuser." Mary Euphrasia decided that she needed to go to Rome to get the Generalate approved, but she wasn't sure who to contact there. One evening during prayers, she felt so compelled that she went to her office and she wrote a letter to a cardinal in Rome, although she didn't know who or which one. She asked this unknown cardinal to put the request for the Generalate to the Pope, who was Gregory XVI at the time. Well, the letter ended up in the hands of Cardinal Odescalchi in Rome. To put it simply, he loved the idea, and he himself had been praying for just such a foundation. He became the champion in Rome for the Generalate. In one meeting with the Pope and some other cardinals, the Pope asked about the opposition that Mary Euphrasia was facing. He had received several letters saying that the generalate was not a good idea. He asked Odescalchi how Mary Euphrasia responded to such overwhelming criticism, and Odescalchi replied, "She says nothing." The Pope then declared, "Then she must be in the right." The Pope and the cardinals were in favor of Mary Euphrasia's plan for the generalate, and she won unanimous approval. In speaking of the generalate, the Pope said, "Only one word bothers me, France." And a priest who had been very supportive, named Father Coleman, spoke up, and he said, "I beg you to change the word France to universe." The Pope approved and said that a work like this could be nothing but universal. It seems that Mary Euphrasia was not the only one with a large vision. So the generalate was approved on January 16th, 1835. The sisters didn't find out until 3 months later, though. No email or phone calls, you know. However, the day in Angers, January 16th, the sisters were at noon recreation and they heard bells ringing. The time was 12:04, and it was not the usual time for ringing bells. The sisters could not figure out what it was for, and they only found out later that it was the exact time in Rome that the generalate was approved.
That's great the generalate was approved so the mission could expand around the world, but that must have been sad to not be a part of Our Lady of Charity anymore.
Yes, it was very sad for Mary Euphrasia. She didn't want to change the original spirit and charism that St. John Eudes left, and so she kept as much the same as she could. The name became Our Lady of Charity of the Good Shepherd, and the habit stayed mostly the same with just a minor change to the silver heart that the sisters wore. Mary Euphrasia said that she felt sorrow her whole life that she couldn't reconcile with her former sisters.
Is Our Lady of Charity still around today?
Well, Our Lady of Charity expanded around the world too. And in the recent past, Good Shepherd sisters and Our Lady of Charity sisters began talking about reuniting, and they did on June 27th, 2014. So now we are back to being one congregation of Our Lady of Charity of the Good Shepherd.
That's great.
I agree. It's just another example of being creative and courageous to see that the mission moves forward.
I bet Mary Euphrasia left us plenty of other examples of that too.
Yes, a lot. As you can imagine, as the work expanded to new locations, there were needs to be filled. For example, in one place, there was a group of girls who could not speak or hear. Mary Euphrasia sent some sisters to learn sign language so that they could communicate. She also sent some sisters to learn how to use a new machine called a sewing machine. And pretty soon requests from other countries began coming in as well. There were requests from Rome and Bavaria, which is now in Germany. Those came pretty quickly. And so many sisters had to go and learn new languages to be sent to these new houses. And all these new places and new needs were coordinated from what we call the Mother House in Angers. Another example that has become somewhat legendary in Good Shepherd is the tunnel at the Mother House.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that. It's still there, right?
Yeah, so the tunnel was built in 1855 to connect the Mother House to a new property across the street called the Abbey of St. Nicholas. See, the sisters were enclosed at the time, and they needed the bishop's permission to leave the compound to go across the street to the Abbey. By this time, Bishop Montault had died, and he was replaced with Bishop Angebalt. He did not support or approve of Mary Euphrasia and the mission, and sometimes even actively worked against her. Well, since the sisters needed his permission to leave the compound, this meant writing a letter for giving the details of who wanted to go, why, where, and for how long, and this request had to be taken to the bishop's house and await his permission. So not only did this create an awkward situation for Mary Euphrasia and her sisters, if there were an emergency at the Abbey, they couldn't go. So what were the sisters to do? Well, they couldn't go out of the compound to cross the street. There was no getting around that rule. Mary Euphrasia did a lot of research to see if there was a subterranean passage from the Abbey to the Mother House. Would you like to read what the annals say?
Our mother, Mary of St. Euphrasia, was far from minded to abandon the problem. There was no road, so she would have one made. She thought of digging a tunnel which would come out at the abbey. It was a large undertaking. Several competent people said it was impossible, but our mother continued with her plan. She brought in an architect who, after studying the situation, finally found the way to go. It was necessary to dig under the route of Imperial of the town of Angers, and for some time disrupt the public right-of-way. But the good God was on our side. Our dear Mother Mary of St. Euphrasia was so good. She was so well appreciated by the authorities that she got from the mayor and the prefect of the department what would have been refused to anyone else. As soon as our mother had authorization for the work, she had the tunnel begun. The workmen started at the end of the month of May.
The work progressed rapidly because there were 50 men working on it, and the sisters, including Mary Euphrasia, helped the work along by going out very early in the morning to clear away the rubble so that the men could continue digging. The tunnel is 55 meters long. It was begun at the end of May 1855 and opened on August 26, 1855. Let's hear how the sisters saw it as it's recorded in the annals.
On Sunday, 26th of August, 1855, at midday, everyone from the mother house, professed sisters, novices, and postulants, made for the tunnel. The sky was a deep blue and the sun brilliant. Soon we entered the subterranean archway. Some lanterns lit our way. We walked with care as the ground was not yet level. Coming out from the tunnel, we climbed the mountain between the two formidable ramparts through the mass of earth and a mound of material. We climbed, and for the first time, the beautiful facade of the Abbey of St. Nicholas appeared before our eyes.
A few things for us to consider as we pause for today. Mary Euphrasia had an amazing attitude in the face of challenges. When faced with a problem, she confronts it, looks at it from all possibilities, and even when it seems that there is no remedy, she continues to look for one. When the possibility of solution is found, she goes for it, and fast. She does all that she can to facilitate the work of the problem solving. And finally, when all is accomplished, she includes the whole household in her joy at success.
That's a lot of information for today and a lot to think about. Let's all take some time with the following reflection questions. If you have a chance, share your thoughts with a partner or a small group.
In our next video session, we'll conclude with the life and mission of St. Mary Euphrasia and continue to consider the impact on our world and on us today. See you then.